Tonight we're going to talk about something that I think is very fitting on Sukkot, because Sukkot is a picture, in fact, of Yahweh's plan. The 8 days of Sukkot, like so many things in Yahweh's timing, point to his ages and his plan. And these things have been going on since the beginning of the world. He has had control of history and time, and he shows himself to be the one who dwells in eternity, who is in total and complete control of his creation. You know, when you're down here on the earth, for a lot of people, it doesn't seem like that, because it seems like there's a lot of chaos. But the chaos that we see, that we experience, it's not too much for him to handle, and many times he actually turns that to use in his plan. So we have a lot of trust in him and in what he is doing and where everything is going to end up, where, as this last day of Sukkot pictures, will end up in the New Jerusalem with our Father and his Son Yeshua to dwell eternally with them. So let's look now at this question of the ages of the world. To many people, if you talk about the ages of the world, they might think about something kind of like this chart that more or less depicts what scientists say are the ages of the world. We go back millions and millions of years, and this is what people think today about the ages of the world. And this has been sold to us to such an extent that pretty much everybody believes this, that man has been on the earth millions of years, and that the ages of man are millions of years old. As a matter of fact, a scientist, Michael Walker, who specializes in what is called the quaternary period, that's an age set by scientists that is called the age of humans. And they claim that it's 2.6 million years old. And this Michael Walker said dating is absolutely crucial. It underpins everything. So they talk about the importance of dating these ages. And then he says the great breakthrough in quaternary archaeology was radiocarbon dating, Walker says. So just think about looking at a wall of rock. How are you going to figure out how old that is? Was anybody around when that rock was put there, other than the Creator? So how are you going to know how old that is? Let's say you find an artifact, perhaps a fossil. How are you going to know how old that is? Well, they invented a system called radiocarbon dating, and not to get technical about it, but it measures the half-life of radiation, radiocarbon radiation. So when you hear about things like that, that sounds like scientific. It goes over the heads of most of us, and we just assume that the scientists know what they're doing, and they must be right about these great ages of man. And if radiometric dating is so crucial to dating the ages of man, then surely it has been validated as accurate. Wouldn't you assume that? Especially when you watch all these TV programs, school textbooks, and so forth, that set out dates as if they know exactly what they're talking about. Well, the truth is, radiocarbon dating has not been validated as accurate. And in fact, the truth is rather shocking. We have a little video for you now.
Can the idea of millions of years of evolution be scientifically validated? Can we really prove this idea of deep time using the same observational science we use for making medicine and putting people on the moon? Validation is the process of confirming what is believed to be true by what can be observed to be true. Has this ever been done for radiometric dating, the process that gives us the very idea of long ages? Actually, long ages and radiometric dating hasn't stood up to the validation test. Radiometric dating has never been validated against the absolute known ages of rocks. Let us explain. Consider Mount St. Helens. This volcano erupted in the 1980s, giving scientists the opportunity to date the rocks that were formed from the eruption. The results? 5 different ages, all between 350,000 and 2.8 million years old, for rocks that we know were less than 30 years old. This discrepancy happens all the time in radiometric dating studies. In fact, there has never been a radiometric dating analysis that simply produces ages that validate to the known ages of rocks. And if radiometric dating doesn't work for rocks of known ages, why do we trust it for rocks of unknown ages? So the next time you hear millions of years ago this happened or that, just ask, how do you know that for sure? And if radiometric dating is the answer given, just ask, are you aware of a study where the radiometric age of a rock agreed with the known age of the rock? And you'll find the answer will undoubtedly be no. The genealogies in Genesis lead us straight back to Adam, just about 6,000 years ago. Have you ever noticed how hard the world pushes the idea of millions of years? Books, movies, museums, schools, it's everywhere. But does any of this even matter? Well, consider this. Many people will only consider the Bible's message if they believe the Bible to be credible, both historically and scientifically. And if people don't believe the Bible got it right on the first page, who's going to trust the rest? So, because it takes faith to believe in either the Bible or the world's view of this distant past, is it a better choice to trust God or a fallible man?
Well, that's very brief, but it shows you the facts that if they use this method to date rocks whose age is known, such as from Mount St. Helens, that are 30 years old, they end up getting millions of years. So what does this tell you about that dating system? It's giving them a lot more time than is actually going by. It's not actually reliable. So we're not talking about that kind of method when we're talking about the ages of the world. We're talking about the ages of the world as found in the Bible. And we're talking about a field known as Bible chronology, or timing by the use of the Bible. And I think it's interesting to note that well-known and highly respected scientists, such as Kepler, for example, and even Sir Isaac Newton, whom many people feel is the greatest scientist who has ever lived, relied on Bible chronology in order to determine the ages of man. So it's not a stupid idea like many people would want you to believe today. So what exactly is Bible chronology? Well, to put it in a simple way, Bible chronology is the arrangement of Bible facts and events in order of time. In other words, in chronological order, to create a historical timeline. And you can do that for the entire Bible or some part of the Bible. For example, what you're seeing here is a simple child's timeline that attempts to look at the time period from the calling of Abraham to the time of King David, marking out important events in between. That's basically all a timeline is and what Bible chronology accomplishes. So we wonder, though, can we accurately use Bible chronology to create an accurate timeline of history? Well, consider this. Only the Bible contains actual written eyewitness documentation of the very earliest generations of man. And absolutely no other source of information can come close to that level of evidence. Any court will tell you that eyewitness evidence is the best evidence. And you don't have to figure out how long the radiometric dating is if you have the people that were actually living then giving you an accurate time record. Well, do they do that? Do they actually give us an accurate time record? Well, in Genesis chapter 5, it essentially closes out everything in the book of Genesis up to that point with these words. This is the book of the generations of Adam. So it's telling you that everything that occurred was either given by God to Adam and he reported it, or Adam himself was the eyewitness that saw it. And this closes that particular book. Goes on and says, in the day that God created man, he made him in God's likeness. He created them male and female and blessed them and called their name Adam in the day when they were created. Now, the other books all tell you about the person being born. This one tells you about Adam being created as his beginning. And then it says, Adam lived 130 years and became the father of a son in his own likeness after his own image and named him Seth. So, we know that from the creation of Adam to the birth of Seth was how long? 130 years, right? It's written in the book of the generations of Adam. And then it goes on and it says, Seth lived 105 years and became the father of Enosh. So now if we add 130 years and 105 years, we have a running count of the time since Adam was created through the time when his son Seth became a father. We call this sometimes the begats of Genesis. And this record goes in sequence without any breaks all the way to Noah and Noah's sons. I actually have done this timeline myself, and this is a copy of it. In fact, this particular timeline that you're looking at, I actually created around the year 2000. And what happened is this very presentation that I'm doing right now, I did back then. And I had overhead slides. And the part you see in white there was in an overhead slide, and I've put it now onto this slide from PowerPoint. And people have been doing this for hundreds of years, figuring this up, because it's very simple. It's just a matter of simple addition from one generation to the next. And this is incredibly reliable because each one of the sons, as they came along, added the information of the person before them as to when that person died. And then it got added on through those generations, through the book of Genesis. There is nothing else like this. There is nothing else that reaches back to the very beginning of mankind and sets out this kind of data. This is amazing. And really, there's nothing else that could possibly touch this. Well, if you use this information, as I've done in this chart, and you add the time all the way from the creation of Adam, what you find in the book of Genesis is a total of 1,656 years from the creation of Adam to Noah's flood. And all of this is carefully documented in the book of Genesis. Now, from here, Bible chronologists take this information and then they move forward in the book of Genesis. And this information continues, and it tells us about Abraham. It tells us about the patriarchs. It tells us about the nation of Israel. And then in addition to this information, as it progresses through the timeline, we have major events of history. Many of them are documented even from other sources, so that all of this information can be put together to make a reliable timeline all the way back to the creation of man, an unbroken timeline. Is that not an incredible thing? Our Father in heaven wanted us to have that. Why would you give that up for some kind of a very, very iffy, dubious system like radiocarbon dating, when you have all of this actually set out by the people who actually lived, and it's been preserved for us in the Scriptures? I think that's just an amazing thing. Well, intelligent, God-fearing, Bible-believing people for literally thousands of years have believed in this information. And it's been the mainstream belief among believers for thousands of years, and they've been tracking this information. For us in the modern world, the best known chronology is that of James Ussher. And he wrote this book around 1650. He was born in the 1500s. And it's called today the Annals of the World. And he carefully sets out all of this information as I've been explaining it to you, but then goes forward. He sets out all the chronological information from Chronicles and Kings about the time of the kings. All the reigns of the kings are there in a very similar way as what I was showing you in the book of Genesis, going down through time, setting out this timeline. And through his chronology, he figured that Adam was created in 4004 BC. He even gives it a date of October 23rd. And his chronology is the earliest systematic chronology and the most celebrated attempt at Bible chronology in the English language. But of course, he borrowed from earlier writers. At this time in history, those who were well educated all spoke Latin and Greek, and he brought forward information from those sources into his book. Ussher's chronology is incorporated into the margins of many King James Version Bibles, has been for hundreds of years and continues to be today. So that this is probably the main source of chronological information for most people in the Christian world. So what we see that Ussher did is by linking biblically specific Bible eras, the begats of Genesis, and other historical information, it was possible for him to produce an unbroken chronology of Bible history, which then overlaps with regular history so that you have an unbroken history from the time of Adam. So when you look at this and you realize that this information has been available for many hundreds of years, you kind of understand that things are different today than they used to be. Because this is a man by the name of Hugh Latimer, who, by the way, not only was a Bible scholar in Latin and Greek, but he also was a martyr who gave his life for his faith. And he said, the world was ordained to endure, as all learned men affirm, 6,000 years. Now you see, not only is he saying 6,000 years, meaning from the creation of Adam, but he's saying all educated people knew this. All educated people knew that in his time. And then he actually sets out the numbers. He says, now of that number there be passed 5,552 years. They knew exactly what year they were at. And then he says, so that there is no more left but 448 years. They were looking forward 448 years, believing that would be essentially the end of the world. And if we add those numbers together, that comes to the number 2000 AD. Ussher's proposed date of 4004 BC differs little from other biblically based estimates of the people that we would call learned men of that day. For instance, we've mentioned Johannes Kepler. He did a chronology, and his date for the creation of man was 3,992 BC. And then Sir Isaac Newton came up with a date of 4,000 BC. Now, when you consider all of the Bible records that are involved in putting together a chronology, those chronologies are incredibly close to one another. And what could be the difference? Why would there be a difference at all? Well, because we have years, but we don't have months. So, if there was a movement of months a little bit here, a little bit that way, it could change the end result a little bit. And so that's part of why there can be slight variations in these chronologies. But what is really amazing about them is that they are all so close together because the information in the scriptures is really so well documented and accurate. Now let's look at some other chronologies. For instance, I think people would be interested in the Jewish calendar. We see a date for the Jewish calendar, and often it doesn't agree with what these chronologies would say. And as I put in this slide, now this is another slide I pulled out of that teaching I did years ago. The Jewish calendar is based on the Seder Olam Rabbah, a Jewish work written in the year 240 AD. It records historical events from the start of creation according to a predetermined 6,000-year plan. Same thinking. According to the Talmud, the Midrash, and the Zohar, the Messiah must arrive 6,000 years from the time of creation. This is what they all believe, whether Jews or Christians. Now, interestingly, the Seder Olam Rabbah has errors. Here's some of the errors. The Persian period in history spanned 185 years from its start in 516 BC. Now, let me just say from other studies I've done, the Persian period is rock solid. There are literally thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of cuneiform tablets with dates on them that actually verify history from the time of Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon forward. So this time period is well known to us and well documented, and we're not just talking about documents that kings would have, but for instance, we have records of banking companies And they actually have tablets that are just like the kind of banking forms and documents we have today. And they're very specific about dating for legal purposes and financial purposes. So if anyone should tell you, in order to defend the Jewish calendar, that, oh, well, our history is wrong, well, it's impossible that it could be wrong. Here's the truth about the Persian period and the Jewish calendar. The Seder Olam reckoned the Persian period as only 34 years. In other words, that's 151 years too short. Then the Median Empire reigned 109 years before joining with Persia. The Seder Olam allows only 18 years. There's another 91 years too short. Then in the Second Temple period, there's an error made of 2 years. So an adjustment has to be made there, leaving a net amount of 240 missing years. Why did that happen? Well, the truth is, according to other prophecy in the scriptures, the Messiah was to come exactly the time that Yeshua made his appearance on the earth. And many people believe that the whole purpose of the Seder Olam Rabbah was to hide that truth. And this could very well be true because there was so much hatred by the Jews against the Jewish believers. But at any rate, we have a missing amount of 240 years. So if you add that back into their timeline, what happens? Well, when you add that back in, then here's what happens. The year 2000 AD was the Jewish year 5760. You add 240 to that, and then the actual Jewish year becomes 6000 AM, or Anno Monday, or Year of the World. So actually, once you correct the Jewish dating from known historical sources, okay, then it agrees perfectly, extremely close, with the dating of other people such as Usher, such as Sir Isaac Newton. Now, if you get into this, some people might say, well, that dating is the same as the Masons. So if you adopt that dating, see, you're adopting paganism from the Masons. People get freaked out like this, right? Sometimes. And the truth is, the Masons themselves say that their system of dating, which they call Anno Lucius, the year of light, doesn't that creep you out? But they say their system is not from the Masons, but comes from Usher's chronology. So they actually borrowed this from the Christians rather than the other way around. So if you accept the biblical chronology, that doesn't make you a Mason or agreeing with the Masons. But I think it is interesting that they have adopted that same chronology, essentially that same chronology, so that according to them, the year 2000 was 6,000 years in their dating of Anno Lucius. Here's something that's very interesting. The creation of Adam is astronomically fixed, that is, by the stars and by the heavenly bodies. This was done by a chronologist named Gene Falstich, the founder of the Chronology History Research Institute. And many of the incidents in the Bible give astronomical information, telling what's happening in the heavens and so on. And Falstich said this: astronomical dating is an exact science in which we can, with the aid of computers, examine biblical events in light of astronomical occurrences. We can take the chronological data given by Noah in Genesis during the flood, and with computers, convert this date into a meaningful calendar. We also note that Noah was on the ark for one solar year of 365 days. The Noah flood events synchronized perfectly with the solstices and equinoxes. So, have you ever read what Noah said about the flood? It reads like something you might call a captain's log. And it logs the events that happened during the period of the flood. And it gives information that gives you a full picture of what happened. And this makes it possible to use astronomical information to date the flood. He goes on and he says, with today's astronomical computer technology, we're able to accurately determine that the flood occurred in 2345 BC and that the first flood rain started to fall on May 14th, 2345. Well, if we take that date for the flood of 2345 BC and we add the remaining years to bring us to 6,000 years, then we will end up at 2000 AD. And the creation of man would be 4001 BC. Because remember, we have the begots, and we can figure them right down to the time of Noah's flood. So we have all of that information astronomically fixed. We're talking about real science here. And this agrees so very closely with what Usher was able to do without the aid of a computer or astronomy, a difference of just 3 years. Isn't that astounding? Now let's talk about these different methods and the differences in them. The astronomical chronology designated 4001 BC as the year of man's creation. And these different calendars, while coming to pretty close to that same dating, nevertheless have some differences. For instance, the reconciled Jewish calendar begins with Tishri in the fall, so it's offset 6 months from the astronomical dating. The Masonic calendar of the York and American Rites actually begins with January. So again, it's some months off from the others. And then finally, the Torah calendar, which is the calendar that we use here at Tsiyon, comes to exactly the same timing, begins with 4001, comes to the year 6000 in the year 2000, begins in the month of Aviv, in the spring, because this is what the Torah designates as the beginning of the year. But all of these are keyed to 4001 as the time of Adam's creation. So as of this particular talk that I'm giving right now, which is in Sukkot of 2018, The Torah year is 6018. Well, we notice what Latimer said, that all learned men knew that the world was ordained to last only 6,000 years. And we've seen that the biblical data, historical data, and astronomical data all point to the year 4001 as the date for man's creation. Yet, the world did not end in 2000 AD. You know, in the 90s, a lot of people were getting very excited as it got closer to the year 2000 because they were really thinking that the rapture would happen then or the kingdom would happen then. And it was a real downer for a lot of people. They were very disappointed by the fact that none of that did happen. I have a 2000 AD story. In the Torah year that began in 1980 AD, which was basically 20 years until the end of 6,000 years of the ages of the world, I was called into an end-time ministry. But I was not sent out specifically to do that ministry right away. Instead, I was led to do other things for quite a long time. And all of this was part of my training for the ministry. But as it drew closer to the year 2000, I was starting to get very concerned because I knew that Yahweh had an end-time ministry for me, and yet he had not yet sent me into that specific ministry. And I was really worried about it. I thought maybe somehow I missed it. I thought maybe somehow I did the wrong thing and zigged when I should have zagged. You know what I'm saying? Have you ever felt like that? Like you kind of question, wow, am I really on the right track here? And you're searching for an answer. Well, it was about this time, just before the year 2000, in the late 90s, that Yahweh started giving me dreams. And I've spoken about this before. In these dreams, I was inside this super big machine that was so big, I couldn't really tell what it was. It has these gigantic gears and everything in it, but it was just so big. It was be kind of like being an ant inside of a pocket watch or something. You just wouldn't know, what is this? And I don't know if you've ever had recurring dreams, but if you're having recurring dreams, for a while, you don't remember them any better than other dreams. But it seems like they start making sort of an impression in your memory after you have the same dream long enough. And that's what was happening to me after a while. And it made me start calling out to Yahweh and saying, what is this dream you're giving me every night? And then I had the dream again. But I had a different perspective where I could see all of this in relationship to all the rest of it. And I realized it was Yahweh's great clock in the heavens. Because, you know, when he set everything into the heavens, the sun and moon and all the stars, he said he did it for us to keep track of time. His time. And he was directing my attention to his time instead of man's time and man's ideas about time. And this put a desire in me to start praying and asking him to reveal to me his time. And a whole lot of stuff happened with that. For instance, he revealed to me about what we call holy time, which is the way his people, Israel, are to keep his time, including this feast that we're having right now. And I got all of that then. And that's when, in fact, I wrote a website up that has all this information that we follow now, which I later turned into a book called Holy Time. All of that was written back then. And, of course, I wondered about all of this, right? The year 2000 and all of that. And looked into it, studied into it. That's when I learned all these things that I've been sharing with you and I'm sharing now. I've been sitting on this for 20 years, waiting for the right time to talk about these time issues. So it actually was this issue of 6,000 years of the ages of the world about to come to an end in the year 2000 that spurred me to begin looking into all of these issues much deeper. And Yahweh honored that by giving me understanding of these matters. And so here's what I wondered. 2000 AD, what went wrong? All the chronologies seemed to be accurate. It all seemed to be right. And yet, the year 2000 came and went. And what was expected didn't happen. Let me explain what I learned in the simplest way that I can share it. Essentially, the math was right, but the expectations were wrong. They expected the wrong thing to happen in the year 2000 because they were mixing up apples with oranges. And if you know the cliche, you know you can't do that. They accurately calculated the years of the world since the creation of Adam. However, it's not that measurement of time that will determine when the Messiah comes and when the age ends. That's where they went wrong. Actually, what they weren't seeing is what I shared with you in my last presentation on this subject, that the seventh creative day, when Yahweh rested, was not just one day long. There is no record there, as I showed you, of Yahweh closing out that day like he did the other six. And in fact, we have scriptures thousands of years after Adam where it's specifically telling us that that seventh day had not yet ended. And even telling us that we can enter into that seventh day on which he rested. So in other words, that seventh day is thousands of years long. And that is the timeline that Yahweh is going by, not the timeline from the creation of Adam. So in the scriptures, as I've explained, Bible chronology shows you the timeline of the years of the world from the creation of Adam. But it doesn't specifically give you a starting point for the seventh day. Adam was created in the sixth day. And a lot of different things happened in the Garden of Eden, still within that sixth day, before finally Yahweh closed out that sixth day, called it finished, and began that seventh day. So what was happening with this chronology is that all of the people, okay, all of them, James Ussher, Sir Isaac Newton, all of the Christians, all of the Jews who figured the time, none of them made that distinction, not one of them. And what they were doing, didn't realize it, is confusing apples with oranges. Very simple kind of mistake, an accounting error, if you will. So even though their math was right, their conclusions were incorrect, because these two time periods, though very close to one another in historical time, nevertheless are not exactly the same length. So what we have is all of the chronologies track the years since man was created, while none of them track the years of the seventh day. And that's what Yahweh is using to track time. So it's just like with everything else having to do with holy time. You know, you got to get off of man's time and get onto his time. That's all what it's about. This is just another aspect of holy time. That's what this is about. So the math was right, but the expectations were wrong. So we wonder, how long since man was created and the start of the seventh day? We'll call this a gap between the start of the ages of the world and then the start of the seventh day. The book of Genesis doesn't give us a number. So we don't know exactly what the difference is in the book of Genesis. But we do know this. If you start counting years at one point, as we see with the apple here, the point where man was created, but the seventh day starts later, you've got a gap, right? Then on the other end of that timeline of the ages of the world will reach 6,000 years having gone by before the other timeline that starts later reaches 6,000 years. Does that make sense? Can you follow what I'm saying? So, actually, when you understand this, then you have to realize that when the year 2000 happened, even though it was 6,000 years since man was created, it would have been impossible for the end to come, because that seventh day had not reached 6,000 yet. It started later. It started later, so it ends later, right? It's that simple. Now, isn't that easy? Don't you think that's amazing that Sir Isaac Newton didn't figure that out? You know, Yahweh hides things. Isn't it interesting? He hides things. And he saves them to reveal to whom he wants to reveal them. This is a truth for the remnant of Israel, not for the Christian church. That's why in our little group here on Sukkot, I'm able to tell you something that all the great wise men of history could never figure out. It's not because I'm smart. It's because Yahweh hid it and chose to reveal it so that you would have it now. So, in talking about this, not just tonight, but other times, this first timeline from the creation of Adam, we will call the ages of the world. This is the ages of the world of man. And these are not actually marked out in 1,000-year periods at all. This is just a continuous history of man. And then we have the second timeline, and we can call this the sixth age of the seventh day that we're in right now. Or we could just call it the seventh day. And this seventh day, as we learned in our last presentation, is divided up in 1,000-year periods, the last of which is the Messianic kingdom. And although the second one is not as long as the first one, because the first one started earlier, both of these time periods will come to an end at the same time, at Messiah's return. 6,000 years of the seventh day will come later than the year 2000. Apples and oranges. So that very simply is the logic. When we factor in all of the knowledge that Yahweh has given us about these issues, we find this logical error that all the chronologists have made, that they've all missed. And what does it show us? It shows us that Yahweh is always right. If something seems wrong to us from the scriptures, it's a human mistake. It's not his mistake. He did it all right. We just don't always understand everything. This is what happens. It happens to us too, doesn't it? I mean, in our walk as believers, have we not had to give up many things along the way that we thought were right, that we thought were of the Bible? We get more information, and then we realize, oh, well, this is different than I thought it was. I have more clarity on this now. This is what the truth is. This is a normal thing to happen with believers. So this is not meant in any way as a condemnation of those men who worked very hard to try and understand what the scriptures were saying and came tremendously close, didn't they, to what the truth is. But not exactly. And so we came to the year 2000, and many people were disappointed. Some people lost their faith over that. And that was totally unnecessary, because there is a reason, there is an answer. They just didn't know what it was then. Why didn't, I tried to show this to people on one occasion back then. And absolutely nobody was able to enter into it. And I'm sure the reason was Yahweh was closing their minds. He had hidden it. And I realized this is not for now. This is for later. And it has proved to be for later. So as we look at this, realizing that the ages of the world reached 6,000 years in 2000 AD, but the sixth age of the seventh day continued on, we see that there is a gap there, And we might wonder, can this gap be known? Is it possible for us to understand that length of time? Well, I'm going to talk about some of that in 1 week from tonight in a presentation called The Last Age of the World. And I'm also going to share some more information with you tonight. Well, we're talking now about the last age of the world. And we have here a graphic that can kind of help you understand where we might actually be right now in the stream of time. We saw that 6,000 years of the age of the world, the time period since the creation of Adam, was up on or about the year 2000 AD. And we saw that the sixth age of the seventh day, the time period that Yahweh is counting by, has continued on from that date and will come to an end at the end of this age with the return of Yeshua Messiah. In other teachings, we've pointed out that the times of the Gentiles came to an end in 1967 AD. And this is when the last generation actually began. And I want to talk about some of these things without getting real specific as you get into some of our other teachings. If you come and sign up as a free member, you'll get a lot of this information that you can examine absolutely free of charge, take all the time you want, and really learn about some of these things, such as this last generation since 1967. One thing we find in the scriptures is that in many places, in timing, we have a 70-year generation. So if that is applied here from 1967 forward, it would put the year 2000 at about the middle of that time period. And then if we were to take that second half then of that time period that began around the year 2000 and divide it in half, we would come to the year 2018. Now, let's say that generation is shorter. Yeshua did say that it would by no means come to an end, right? So possibly it's shorter. But let's say it were to be exactly 70 years. Then right now, we would be right at the middle of that last half of that generation. In other words, since the year 2000, 18 years have gone by, and about 18 years in that case would be left. Does it seem like a long time to you since the year 2000? Maybe if you're a young person, it might, because it might be a big part of your life. For some others, like me, it doesn't seem like such a long time. In fact, it seems like it has really been speeding by. And if you look at our chart here, you look at all of that time that's behind us and the very little time that's ahead of us. My question to you would be, what do you want to be doing with that time? Do you think it's a good idea to just coast along and just kind of see what happens? I don't think that's a good idea. I think that's the whole point of this, isn't it? This is the reason why Yahweh has given us some measures of time, not to make us feel smart and like we know a lot, but in order to show us the urgency of the times in which we live. And it's kind of like a race. You know, if you have a long race, you have to pace yourself, but what do you do when you get to the last stretch of the race? That's where you pour it on, isn't it? Because that's where you really need to give of your whole self. Well, what is ahead of us? Here's some things that the scriptures seem to show that are ahead of us for believers and for the world. And I'm going to go with the bad news first, but fortunately there is good news, so don't get all discouraged because I share this, okay? Right now, there are forces in the world that have been working really hard to overturn a biblical worldview that has basically dominated the Western world for 2 millennia. However, we're well along in that process, and we're seeing that essentially the anti-God forces are smelling blood, and they're working really hard to overturn that biblical worldview, and we're going to see that happen within whatever number of years are left. I think if you're awake to what's going on, you can understand that that's going to happen probably sooner rather than later. When that happens, Jezebel will reign. What I mean by that is the spirit of Ahab and Jezebel will be all around us, will dominate everything. And again, if you're paying any attention to what's going on, you're seeing that spirit of Jezebel rising up in a really powerful way. And you're seeing the Ahab spirit also rising up, being dominated by that Jezebelian spirit. And this is terrible for believers on so many levels. Now, these things are not necessarily in order because these different streams of events are all kind of ongoing and interwoven. So I'm not laying out a chronological list here, but just some of the things that are happening, probably many of them to some degree or another happening at the same time or in process. America will fall. And I don't say that lightly. But if you think about America as based on the Constitution that upholds the Creator as being the creator of men and women, and that lays out God-given rights, that is absolutely anathema to the forces that are seeking to take over the world. So in overturning a biblical worldview, the purpose of that, to a large degree, is to overturn America as a nation. And America is fighting for its life right now. And it's going down for the count. It's fighting bravely. Those people who understand what's going on are fighting hard. But these forces that are coming up are overwhelming, And the scriptures tell us how it turns out. So please don't be mad at me that I'm just telling you the things that the scriptures are telling us about the near future. These things will happen, and yet there will be no pre-tribulation rapture of the church system. And if you think 2000 coming and going without the end is a disappointment, wait till you see what happens as people come to that realization that the pre-tribulation rapture isn't happening, and yet all the hatred of the world is being brought to bear on believers. The people who have believed in the pre-tribulation rapture, for the most part, have not prepared themselves for what is coming. And this is going to be a terrible blow that many of them will not be able to bear and will not be able to stand up to. The church will completely cave in. You're already seeing a lot of it. Apostasy is everywhere, but it will not be able to stand up to this wave of social and political change. And it will entirely cave into it. And already we're seeing this. Teachings will arise. False teachers will arise that will be calling evil good and good evil, and will pretend to be basing it on the Bible. But actually, they will be acting out of fear of Jezebel, fear of Ahab. And they will want to please those powers. They will see that as the winning side, and they'll totally cave in. This will be a crisis we're talking about for all Bible believers as these things unfold over the next few years. This will follow people. If you're a believer and people know it, this will follow you into the classroom. If you're a student, this will follow you into your job. People will be fired from their jobs simply because they are believers, simply because they insist on following the scriptures and the morals of the scriptures. Believers will be labeled more and more as haters, and they will be treated as if they are Nazis. They will be spit upon, they'll be hit. Charges will be trumped up against them. Some of them, in order to save their own skins, will be betraying others. Fathers and mothers will be betraying their own children and vice versa. And it will be a truly horrible time. And believers will be running in every direction to find some sort of protection and calm from that storm. And most people that claim to be believers do not have an active relationship with God. Those who do, of course, will find him and will find what he's doing, and he'll be there for them. But many of them don't even know how to do that. Many of them don't even want to do that because all they ever saw God for was to be their vending machine God that's going to give them all the stuff they want. And those kind of people will not make it through with their faith intact. Very rarely will that happen. Now, maybe some of them will repent, and we hope that many of them do. But in the main, there's going to be such a huge falling away from the faith that there is absolutely nothing in history that even compares to what will be happening. Yeshua told us all these things, friends. He told us all this would happen during this time period. And as things are speeding up, we are seeing this more and more. There is more persecution of believers in the world right now than there even was in the time of the Romans. It's the worst it's ever been right now. And it's only going to get so much worse, and it's going to come in the Western world and what people think of as the civilized world, and it will probably be worse here than it is there, simply because everybody is being tracked. What do you think is going to happen with all those databases that they've been keeping? What are they going to use those for as they push their globalist agenda? Finally, this will bring everything to the whole Great Tribulation scenario, which would be the final 7-year period before Messiah comes. I kind of think of that as good news, actually, but a lot of people see it as bad news. Okay, I guess enough of that, and let's look at some of the good news. While all of that is happening, Yahweh will raise a standard in the world for the righteous, the remnant of Israel, with whom he's working right now, working in their lives in invisible ways that nobody can see, nobody can know, not even Google. And he is working to prepare them and in the due time to gather them. They are out there. That's why we're here. We're here for you. If you're getting any of this, you're probably one of these people. And we're here for you. This will bring about the remnant exodus from all the nations of the world. Israel, that has been assimilated for generations, all people from all the tribes of Israel, will become aware of their heritage, of who they really are. And they will become aware of their true identity. They will rise up with the Messiah of Israel. They will become a part of his holy nation that he is creating right now. They will cleanse their lives of every defilement of flesh and spirit in order to be the holy people that Israel is called to be. They will be ordered according to the tribes of Israel, according to holy array, the order of Israel, and they will go out of all the nations, and they will be gathered together in one place. And from there, Yahweh will lead them. There will be enemy forces that will try to stop them, and they will not have to do a thing except trust him. And he has already made his plans as to how he's going to deal with them. And in the process, this will become a spectacle to the entire world in turmoil, and especially to the righteous who do not know which way to turn. And they will see Yahweh glorified in the world. And they will repent of all the false teaching they have believed. They will be awakened in their minds and in their spirits. And they will find out that there is a place of safety being prepared for the righteous, that the remnant of Israel actually represent an alternative to the apostate church and to the satanic world. And they will make a choice. Everyone, in fact, will have to make a choice. There'll be only two choices. The Antichrist system or the Israel of Elohim. That's all there will be. And they will have to choose what side they're going to be on. And those who choose to be a part of Israel, who follow the Messiah of Israel, they will have victory together as his nation through the worst events the world has ever seen, the Great Tribulation. And he will carry them through the Great Tribulation just like he carried Noah through the flood. And in doing that, he will show his great power and his love for his people Israel and his faithfulness to the covenant of Israel. And Israel will succeed in its mission of glorifying Yahweh, and it will happen in this generation. When we talk about things like this, many people are fearful. And I understand why. Because everything is being shaken that can be shaken. Nothing is really solid out there. And it looks a lot like the tsunami that happened the other day, right? All of a sudden, the ground has gone out from under you. Everything is swept away. It's terrifying. But for those of us who belong to him, we're reminded in 2 Timothy, Elohim did not give us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and self-control. Yes, you know, even when the whole world looks so crazy, and everybody feels so powerless, those of us who have the Spirit of the living God living inside of us have unimaginable power that we can access to meet every situation. It doesn't come from us, it comes from him. And it's because he loves us and he will not fail us. And he will do everything he said he would do. And he will bring us through. We will win, not by fighting those evil forces with weapons of this world, through generating evil and hatred towards those who would do us harm, but we will be victorious through love. His love for us, and then that love moving through us to others. This is a weapon that Satan has no defense for, and it's ours. And self-control. You know, this is a big problem in the world. A lot of the world's problems are because they do not have self-control, the self-control of the Holy Spirit. They're not able to control their own lives. Now, let me tell you something about fear. When you are gripped with fear and you allow your emotions to take over, all of this, for the moment, goes out the window, doesn't it? If you happen to be, say, a powerful senator on an elevator, and you have a bunch of hysterical women start yelling at you, you might shrink with fear into the corner of the elevator and do stupid things that you otherwise wouldn't do. People are motivated so much by fear, friends. And if we're honest, doesn't this happen to us sometimes? You know, a lot of people have their phobias. What are you afraid of? Did you have some bad experience in your life? And are you scared to death that that might happen to you again? So you do everything you can do to plan your life so that doesn't happen to you. You know, if you let fear rule your life, then Yeshua Messiah on the throne is not ruling your life. And we're not called to fear. We really don't need to fear. Now, at the foundation of fear is fear of death. This is probably the foundational fear for all people. And, you know, this is natural. We have this self-protective thing that Yahweh has put in us in order to not be stupid, right? And to shy away from things that could lead to our death. So this is perfectly normal. But let me tell you, the enemy can use that normal kind of fear against you and turn it into terror. The night that they came to get Messiah, why did all of his closest disciples scatter? Friends, they were gripped with fear. They were afraid that what was going to happen to him would happen to them. You know, I feel for them. I'm not condemning them. Because I think there's an example in what happened with them that really speaks to us, and we have to understand that that could happen. You know, I had an experience back during the earlier time I was talking to you about. It was in 2001. And I had a dream. And I was on top of this building, high in the air. And I could see another building that was much like the one I was on. And there were people all over the top of both buildings. And everybody was kind of laughing and talking and so forth, as crowds of people do. But pretty soon, there started being sort of tittering and talking going on that was directing attention towards an aircraft that was approaching. People weren't too worried about it, though, because it was still a long way off. But it kept coming. And as it got closer, it became apparent that there was no intention for this aircraft to turn the other way. And soon what you heard were the sounds of complete terror, screaming, crying. But there was no place to go because there was not enough time to go. It was certain death. And I myself came to this realization in this dream, and I could see I was going to die. And the first thing that happened when I realized I was going to die is that I was gripped with the terror of death in that dream. But there wasn't time for doing very much. So I cried out to the Lord and said, Lord Yeshua, receive my spirit. And his peace totally filled me, and the fear was totally taken away. And the plane hit the building, and I died. Isn't that a strange dream? I woke up very disturbed by the dream. Dawn was there, and I told her about the dream. And I wondered, what could this actually mean? But it affected me very profoundly, because even though I've had other times when death has been near before that, this somehow had a different quality. And the fact that I actually died kind of upset me. Is Yahweh telling me that something like this is going to happen to me? I didn't know. Well, 1 week later, we were watching television, which is something we never did. And all of a sudden, there's breaking news. And we see the whole Twin Tower scenario before our eyes. And I realized Yahweh had showed me that a week before it happened. It was more about that timing stuff. But it also was about dying. And it was a powerful experience to have that terror give way to peace. Now, since then, I actually have died a couple times. And I just want to tell you, dying is not such a big deal. You know, you don't really hurt when you die. It's just a peaceful thing, like going to sleep. Doesn't hurt. Maybe people could do something to kill you that might hurt. You know, I don't know. Maybe like if they poured acid all over your body, that would hurt until you died, right? But actually dying doesn't hurt. It's very peaceful. And if you're a believer and you've walked with Yahweh, he's there. There's no place you can go that he's not there. You know what? Nobody that knows him will ever die alone, because he will always be with them. And this is what I found. And you know what? I was scared in the dream, but in these two events that happened to me, which were both heart attacks and flatlining, I was not afraid. I guess I learned something from the dream, you know what I mean? And other things have happened, strengthening my faith since then. And I literally was not afraid at all. And so don't be afraid of death. You know, our sister has that wonderful line, don't be afraid to die. I love that line. How many songs have you ever seen that had that line? People are so afraid of death, you don't mention death, right? They don't want to hear death. I bet you right now people are turning off the stream because I'm talking about death. People are afraid to even hear that there is such a thing as death, let alone that it could happen to them. With the world where it's going, we all have to learn this lesson. That song is exactly right. Don't be afraid to die. Because, friends, listen, if you belong to Yeshua Messiah, death is just an illusion. It's not even real. All of Yahweh's people are alive to him, aren't they? It's just an illusion. Everyone who dies in this body, who belongs to him, will be raised when he comes, and that's not going to be very long from now. So don't be afraid to die. It says, don't be ashamed of the testimony of our Lord, but endure hardship for the good news. Now that sounds like the prosperity message, doesn't it? No, I don't think it does. Be prepared. It's time to think about that, about hardship for the good news. According to the power of Elohim. This is how we handle problems. This is how we handle hardship, by the power of Elohim. You know, you probably noticed, besides all these beautiful young people here, there's some of us here with white hair and some of us with no hair. And we're people that have been around for a while and have been walking with Yahweh for a while. And we know something about hardship. We know something about suffering for the good news. And we're here. We made it through those things. And I know for a fact that every one of us would not trade those things for anything. Because in every case, we gain so much more than what we lost through those hardships. We gain spiritual treasures that will stay with us for eternity. So besides not being afraid to die, don't be afraid of hardships. You can handle it with Yeshua Messiah. Just don't make it because you're doing something stupid or something against his commandments. You can bring all kinds of hardships on yourself that are unnecessary. Don't do that. But hardships that we bear for the cause of Messiah, these are the hardships it's talking about here. Elohim, who saved us and called us with a holy calling. Holy meaning set apart. All of his people have been called. They have been set apart for this day. If you are one of his people and you are alive now as we're going into these final days of this final generation, don't worry. You were made for this day. You've got in you what it takes to do your part. You need to trust the living God, and you need to trust that he put you here for a reason right now. And you can do it. And you don't have to be afraid. And all of this is not according to our works. It's not because we're smarter than the other guys, or bigger or stronger, or have more resources. In fact, you know, Yahweh really likes it when we don't have any of that stuff. Because then he's lifted up when he does great things through us. And isn't that what we want? That's how it works. According to his own purpose and his grace. You know, I don't understand some things. You might think I know a lot because of all this stuff that I share with you. I don't understand the mystery of his grace. I don't understand why he chose me to be his. I'm just grateful. I'm just grateful that I'm a vessel of his grace. And it's just a fact. You know, some things you have to accept just because it's a fact. You don't have to understand everything. Some things are just true. He chose us according to his purpose and his grace. We have a holy calling according to his will in these days, which was given to us in Messiah Yeshua before times eternal. Let me tell you something. That's way before the timeline I'm talking about tonight. Times eternal. You can't put years to that. Yahweh had you in his heart as part of his purpose for this day before time's eternal. And he wanted you for his son or his daughter. And he wanted you to be able to walk in the power of the Holy Spirit and to condemn this world through your faith. So do not be afraid. You are really too big for that. There's no reason to be afraid with a God like that. Okay, I got a little wound up on that one. Here's more good news. The Antichrist forces, Revelation 17:14. The Antichrist forces will war against the Lamb. And the Lamb will overcome them. That does not surprise me. For he is Lord of lords and King of kings. But then I really like this verse. They also will overcome who are with him, called and chosen and faithful. These are the people that answered the call. These are the people who stepped up and said, I want to be with him, and chose to walk with him wherever he goes. That's who the overcomers are. And they will overcome with him. They'll overcome everything. They'll overcome those Antichrist forces we're talking about. They'll even overcome their own flesh nature and sin. They'll overcome all of it with him. Be an overcomer. I see lots of overcomers out there. Be an overcomer. He who overcomes, I will give to him to sit down with me on my throne. Does this blow your mind? You know, this is the Yeshua I cry out to when I can't find my keys. You know what I'm saying? And he is going to empower me, if I let him, to be an overcomer. And then once he's done that, he's going to give to me to sit down with him on his throne. Isn't that like way better than having your own throne? Is that not amazing? You know, I'd be embarrassed sitting on a throne, actually. Wouldn't you? Embarrassed or not, I'm going to sit on one. That's the plan. It says also, as I also overcame and sat down with my Father on his throne. What he's telling us is he's bringing us right into fellowship with the Elohim family in heaven, ruling with our Father, with his Son. Isn't that amazing? And they are going to come and be with us right here on this earth in the New Jerusalem. So when we look at all of that, do we have to be worried as we approach the end of this age? No, we have to be aware. We have to be diligent. We have to put Messiah first in our life. We have to throw off every fear from our lives. We need to do the things we're called to do. Yeah, we do have some things to do. All of which put together means be an overcomer. We do have to do that. But he's there every step of the way to help us do it. So, where does this bring us? Where we stand as bondslaves of Yeshua Messiah is here. Our battle cry has become our victory cry. May this victory cry strike fear into the heart of the enemy. Bring it! We are more than conquerors through him who loved us. Our victory is in Yeshua Messiah. Thank you all so much.
Was this video informative? Click the like button below to help spread the word to others. Feel free to leave a comment and share your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you won't miss out on more amazing content from Eliyahu ben David.